Welcome back to another episode of the Between Breaths podcast. I'm Jacko and I am your host. And you have actually got on an absolute treat today. I'm so excited to speak to Will Burnett. He has ran across the whole of Australia. He was actually, when I was going to get a guest onto podcast, I was like, right, this is this guy I need to speak to. He was the first. He's not ended up being the first guest because he wasn't the first to record with, but he was the first person I reached out to once I'd launched the Between Breaths podcast because I spoke to him before he did his run. He started his run across Australia, I think, the day after I finished the Ring of Fire. And we spoke, and he gave me lots of good advice. I ran for 3 days. He ran for 81 days. So a different kettle of fish. I was just like um, it feels insignificant, but it was significant at the time. But yeah, Will is he also teaches breath work. He does a lot of work with trauma. He's does a lot of work with veterans. He's a veteran himself. He's got a very powerful story, very powerful message. He's full of love, full of compassion. Very humble and honest guy, and doing some amazing work. And he shares his story with us. In this podcast, and I think you're gonna absolutely love it. Yeah, I can't thank him enough for coming on, and also look forward to hearing what you make of this podcast episode. In terms of endurance running and events, there was one thing we discussed around what sort of issues around diet and being able to eat enough, but also what he was fueling with, and a lot of his training being with a ketogenic diet in ketosis. So he had himself been using the ketone IQ that I've been talking about recently, and thank you to HVMN as ever for sponsoring the Between Breaths podcast. He, like myself, has been using it to help with fuel his training, but also when he's not training to help with improving brain fog and focus. So he, as I have been, is enjoying the product. I thank HVMN for sponsoring the podcast, and to let you know, you can get 20% off with code Jacko at hvmn.com, or you can literally click the link in the show notes, which will be hvmn.com/Jacko, and it puts the code in automatically for you, and you get your 20% discount automatically. You don't even have to worry about putting it in. So there you have it, 20% off Ketones IQ with code Jacko at hvmn.com. So without further ado, here is William Burnett on the Between Breaths podcast. We enter this world taking our first breath, and sadly, we leave this place taking our last. And what I want to do with this podcast is to explore what happens between those breaths. I'm David Jackson, Jacko, and this is the Between Breaths podcast. So, Will, welcome to the Between Breaths podcast. I'm very excited to talk to you. So welcome.
Thanks, brother. It's been a moment, but I'm glad we're sitting down together and talking again.
Yes, you say again. There's my excitement comes from, just for the context of the listeners, we spoke just before I did what was my big thing, which turns out to be, in context, to be a little thing. My big thing last year was, in terms of a run, an ultra marathon, was a 3-day 135 mile, 216 or something kilometer run around Anglesey in North Wales. And Will kindly hosted an Instagram live and gave me some very good advice. Everything from what salts to take on, which I'd never had a single bit of cramp with the LMNT on. So shout out to them and shout out to you for that. But yes, tell people about, just firstly, I think, what did your run into? How far did it go? Then we'll get into just the whole, the why and the who, but what did you, just to hit them with something big, what did you do?
I ran from the western coast of Australia to the most eastern point of Australia, and it was a total of 4,550 kilometers in 81 days.
4,000 kilometers in what, 80?
81 days.
And was that continuous? Did you have any days off, or was it 81 days straight?
81 days straight. Yeah. So it's ultra marathon a day.
I've just done a very dysfunctional breathing pattern of I just took a big sigh. It's not because I'm not because I've suddenly become sensitive to CO2, but literally because my nervous system has just gone. Jackie, you did 3 days and you were as broken a man as you've ever been. Like, yeah, before we get so give us an intro of like the why, like why do that? And I
Hmm.
think you've got a strong why, and you wouldn't be able to do something like that unless you had a strong why. But then also for the listeners that haven't come across, like who's this Jack dude with loads of tats? It looks pretty cool. That's just told me he's run 1,000 kilometers in 81 days. Like I want to know who this guy is. Like if someone that doesn't know who you are, who is William?
Thank you, man. Yeah, so I'm a veteran. I was in the military for 12 years and I was a physical training instructor. Nowadays, I practice and facilitate breath work and a myriad of other tools in nervous system regulation. I work closely with veterans and emergency responders, and more recently with men specifically. And my role inside of that container is to provide these men an opportunity to learn how to regulate their nervous system, learn how to come into their body. And that has a flow-on effect into their lifestyles. There's loads of byproducts we could talk about there. But for the most part, I am guiding men back to that father archetype, back to that masculine archetype, where we've slowly drifted away from in the last century. So when I left the military, I was medically discharged. Okay, so I had a series of physical and mental health conditions that retired me at the age of 27. And on my final specialist appointment, the specialist said to me that I was going to end up in a wheelchair before 35 because my conditions were presumably going to get worse as the days went on.
Wow.
And that's everything from osteo and rheumatoid arthritis through my ankles, knees, hips, and spine.
Yeah.
Excuse me, to torn shoulders, knees. I had cysts in both my knees, collapsed discs in the lower half of my lumbar, PTSD, depression, bipolar, personality disorder. And there's a very, very long list of accepted conditions.
And that's scary to hear, right? At that age. Yeah.
Very much like at 27, and I had a family. I have a family, and at that point I had 3 children. We had one
Wow.
on the way, or one planned at that time, and
Yeah.
they were saying I was going to be medically retired, never to work ever again, and to be in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Now, that is confronting, and at the same time very rewarding to receive that information when you've got a mindset like the one that I had and the one that I practice day to day. You don't want to be beaten. You don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear that the future for you is bleak, and you're going to be disabled and all of these things. It's not an identity that I was willing to shift into. And so when I left, I floated around. I fell back onto what I was comfortable. I went back to coaching CrossFit, coaching strength conditioning, and then I explored a little stint at F45, and it made my blood cringe just being inside of that environment. Not the people, the community is fantastic. But the amount of autonomy people get to throw weights around in such a short amount of time really scared me. And so I stepped away from that. And I took every last cent that was in our bank account, much to my wife's dismay, and I invested it in learning from the best in the world. I went and knocked on the doors of who I knew at that time were the best at what they were doing, and what we now know as this tool of breath work. And I spent 4 years inside of that educational framework, and at the same time developing my own theories around how trauma was manifesting in the body physically and emotionally, and how we could tap into that and redesign a new personality or personal reality, as Joe Dispenza would refer to it as, so that I could overcome these injuries, so I could heal these injuries. Now, for the listeners, they're probably thinking, arthritis, you can't heal that, or there's these, PTSD and depression. Yes, we may be able to move beyond that, but it's always present. And my theories were that you can, and I have. And so for that time, and it's been 7 years now, in that time, my theories grew legs and started to walk on their own. And the further I went down the rabbit hole in the science and the spirituality, the more I discovered about how possible and how real these practices can be and how potent they become. And it took me 3 years from start to finish to really challenge my theories. And that's why I took up the baton, and said, I'm going to take this forward and prove that it can be done. And in the same time, educate along the way and provide people, veterans specifically, the opportunity to know that there is another way. You don't have to be medically discharged, go on pharmaceuticals for the rest of your life, talk therapy for hours and hours, and feel like you're not getting anywhere. You can access these alternate states of consciousness where we can recreate new narratives in our own conscious awareness and redevelop a new human. And this run across Australia was exactly that. It was the experiment. I had these theories. I hypothesized that there was different parts of the run that would test, and I would implement these practices and these tools, and at the same time rehabilitate myself whilst training and doing the run. And so, every theory was challenged. Every variable that I considered had popped up tenfold and then some. And so, by the time I got to the east coast of Australia, my final ascent into the township of Byron Bay, which is the town on the east coast there, I chose to do a 24-hour run on the final day, which ended up getting me to 108 miles or 110 miles in 24 hours. It was the first time I'd ever done that, but
Wow.
It was the final piece of the experiment to be like, well, I just did 80 days of ultra marathons. This one last, crack at the experiment. Let's really see how potent this is. And it took everything in me. Yes, I was depleted. I was fairly malnourished. I was living off 2,500 calories a day when I was burning roughly 8,000 to 14,000, depending on the distance I was running. And
How
so
were
I was
you
fairly
only?
depleted.
Yeah,
Yeah.
was that just? Did you not have anyone there giving you some? Why so depleted? And
So when you run, like Jacko, like when you do consecutive miles in consecutive days, you try and consume as much
okay,
as you can, and
it's
it
just too
becomes
hard.
really it becomes really difficult to consume enough calories or even eat. Which for me, I'm a huge advocate for the eating process, much less the smoothie or juice process, because masticating, chewing, it's part of the digestive system, and
Yeah,
we want to incorporate as much of those behaviors as possible, especially when trying to keep the nervous system down regulated.
yeah.
And so I just couldn't consume, and the
Right,
other
okay.
factor there is roadkill. I never expected it to impact me as much as it did, but when you're day in and day out running past 20, 30 plus dead kangaroos or emus or
Oh,
goats or wombats, like the smell just
yeah,
stays with you. And when you get back to the camp, you don't feel like eating meat.
yeah,
Finding fresh produce that's not been sprayed in pesticides and insecticides is near on impossible,
yeah.
just due to the very nature of Australia being a desert. And so it was a lot of smoothies, as much, peanut butter and chocolate protein and,
Yeah.
almond milk and MCT oils and all of those things. It was as much as that as I could jam into a smoothie. And then during the day while I was running, it was salts, frozen mango. I become quite fond of
Mango.
frozen mango.
Mine was watermelon. Someone brought me a watermelon, and I was like, thought they were Jesus. I was like, I didn't even realize I liked watermelon. I was like, watermelon. Yeah.
I just imagine you just like in this
Oh my
watermelon.
word! It was on my. I mean, it sounds. I don't want to say the last day because well, no, it was the last day. It was only 3 days long. But yeah, by then it was like, yeah, came out this corner. There was this guy who was also called Dave, who had done the event a few times in the past before and set up his little camper van and had like a spread of things just for people coming past. And it was like, oh, what a fucking legend. Anyway, yeah.
What a legend.
What just give us a bit. forgive me if like I've got so many questions and the order of them is just going to go potentially out of the window. So apologies for that, and also for for the listeners for that. But you just mentioned there, because one thing to think about is like you're running from the west coast to east coast. And said like basically like running through a desert. Like, what was the terrain? Are you running on a road all the time, or is it off road? Is it a bit of both? Like, yeah. And where did you stay? Like you said, go back to camp. Did you have to go somewhere for the night and then go back to the start for the next day again? What was some of the logistics like? Because having done that sort of process just for only 3 days, like it's horrendous logistically as well. But so yeah, what was it like? Paint the picture for us, so those that are in other
So
parts of the world.
I spent most of my days running on like bitumen or tar roads, which were main highways predominantly, because Australia, in the middle of Australia specifically, you don't really get to suburbia until you get to bigger townships, which are well established. But most of the townships I was passing from the west coast right to the middle of South Australia, there's 200 odd kilometers between each town, and they're mostly just made up of roadhouses where you could fill up gas or petrol, or
Yeah.
a takeaway shop where they've got a 24-hour bain marie, which is cooking just plastic shit. And so and then you've got places to stay as well, where you can just like pull up your caravan, and you can stay in your caravan. So I spent nearly 85% on main roads, running against traffic on the shoulder, and the shoulder
Wow.
was less than a meter, and
Yeah.
prior to the road finishing, it was all like scrub or gravel or bush or shrubs, and so stay on this narrow shoulder, and it was very hilly. From the western coast to South Australia was super hilly, and then from South Australia, the middle of South Australia to the middle of New South Wales was monstrous hills. And with camp specifically, like I chose to have a small team. When we first started planning this project, I thought, you know what, I'll get as many people as I can to support, professionals to help with my recovery, and we'll have a killer team. And then getting closer, I was getting signs. The universe was just presenting me signs, and so I made the decision to cut the team back and really like minimize it as much as I possibly could, which meant it was myself, my wife, and my two children, and then my best friend, who was my support vehicle driver, who stayed with me every single day and met
Wow.
me at checkpoints to refill my hydration. And so day-to-day occurrence would be we'd wake up, 03:30, I'd get up, go through my morning protocol, some breath work, meditation, visualization, some range of motion, and then I'd use the Theragun to just, bash into my legs as much as I could. And from 04:30, we'd be on the road and we'd drive to the start point, whether that be back or forward, depending on the township. We'd drive to that start point. The longest drive we had was 2 hours one day, and then by the end of that day, we were half an hour out.
But
And then
driving 2 hours just to start is just so demoralizing. We had like between 30 and 45 minutes at most to get to the start of each morning. Yeah. Yeah, I feel that.
so like 2 hours, it's like, well, if I'm going to be sitting in for 2 hours, it's not ideal to be sitting in a car in that position.
Mm.
And so I'd try and recline as much as I could. I'd use the gun again, and I'd go back into my visualization, like on every now and again, opening my eyes, visualizing the terrain as much as I could, and then I'd close them and then just map it out again, and really put myself on the road every single day, so that by the time I was moving, because I had so many things I was fighting, just
Mm.
starting to run, like you limp for about half an hour to 40 minutes. You limp because you're just so sore and stiff. And
Yeah.
so
When did that? So,
I was
but
I was trying.
how soon did that start? Like, how soon? How many days before it was like this is literally horrific for the first half an hour of running? Like, was that day 2 or 3 or 4 or day 10? Like, when did it start getting just minging first thing in the morning?
Yeah, roughly around day 10. Day 10, I started to get really stiff, and my Achilles swelled like to double size. Like the Achilles was 10 centimeters in width. It was all purple, and it was up into my calf, And, so that started hurting. And then by day 14, my right Achilles did the same thing. And due to the amount of days that I was limping and favoring one side, I'd created an imbalance biomechanically. And so by week 3, I actually tore my right meniscus in my right knee. And then by week 4, tore my left piriformis, both overuse injuries and just starting to deteriorate. And then week 7, I broke some metatarsals in my right foot as well. And so I spent a good 7 to 8 days walking ultra marathons. So I was out walking for 12 to 13 hours.
So you just
and
walk. You walked the whole. You just walked the whole thing because you
couldn't
couldn't even jog. Right.
couldn't
Brutal.
jog. And then my transition back into running was, when I felt a bit more movement or I felt a bit more energetic, I'd test the shuffle. And then it's like the old Glenn Hoddle
The
shuffle.
magic shuffle.
And
Yeah, I know it. I know it. But it's magical when
and
you're like, I can do it, and it's just like, wow. Like
oh
I
man, it's
almost
the
never thought
greatest
that I'd be
feeling.
able to do this again. Yeah.
It's like that scene from Forrest Gump where he's a kid and he's running and his calipers come off and he's
Yeah.
just running
Yeah.
down
Yeah.
the
Well,
road.
the funny
That's what
thing
it
is,
feels like.
it feels like that. And then I've watched, I don't know if you've seen the Between Breast film, I've watched effectively back what it was actually like. And in my mind, and I'm scripted, you hear me talking about how I felt like I was sprinting. And then you watch, you
Yeah.
watch the clip and it's like, okay, you're going a bit more than a shuffle, but you're pushing it, calling that a sprint, Jacko. But that's what it feels like, right?
It does, man. It feels like freedom,
It
and
feels, yeah.
so transitioning back into running, I found that momentum again in the shuffle, and then I spent I'd periodized my rehabilitation back into running. So I'd go like 2 kilometers of shuffling, and then I'd do 3 kilometers of walking.
Right.
I'd get the pit stop, rehydrate, 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers, and then that soon turned to 2.5, then 3 kilometers of running, 2 kilometers of walking, and then slowly but surely I got back to that jog slash run. And once those injuries had passed, I was back at my peak. My knee still felt a bit stiff and it was still a bit sore most mornings, but I was very blessed. Rock Tape reached out halfway through and they said, "Hey man, we saw you wearing some tape. We just, we want to hook you up and send you a whole box." And bless them, they sent me like 20 to 30 rolls of tape and I went through most of them, but I taped my knee, which I wasn't fond of because I was still worried about that imbalance. I didn't want to, overcompensate in different areas and then have long-term conditions there on after. But it didn't happen that way. I was completely mindful about each foot placement. I wear 0 drop shoes, wide toe box. I was wearing ultra runners. And so I knew where my foot was hitting every time. So I knew the impact, how each muscle was contracting, and I was fully cognizant of it, because when you're out there running that long, it's either you and your thoughts or it's focus. And if you focus and become hyper vigilant in how you're performing, you have a tendency to perform at a higher level, which is a no-brainer really. But when you're in the thick of things and in the flow of things, it's not always the case, right? So it took a while. It took about 6 weeks to fully come to. And after that, I was good as gold. I could run. My times were getting faster. I was doing 60 kilometers in about, I don't know, I think the fastest I did 60 was 5 hours 35 or something like that. So times were getting faster. I was getting and because I was getting faster, I was reducing the amount of pit stops I was having. And then when that was occurring, I was like, you know what, let's increase the distance. And so I went to 80 Ks, and then I went to 100 Ks. And then when we got to that last day, I'd planned that we landed in a town in Grafton, which was 170 plus kilometers, depending on what road I took. And I knew that I could do that in 24 hours. And I did it in 24 hours, right on the money. And I don't know whether I was like thinking about that the whole time or whether it was by chance, but yeah, nailed it right on the 24-hour mark.
Um, so if I was trying to do a little bit of quick math, that if you've done 4,000 kilometers in roughly 80 days, like that's like an average of 50k a day. Is that, am I doing the math right on that? But you did some that were much bigger and some that were then smaller than 50k.
Yeah, 4,552 kilometers. So
Right.
roughly it was anywhere between 53 and 65 were the
Yeah.
average days that I
Yeah.
would do. Yeah.
Yeah. And you were going more than 10k an hour for some of those longer ones, which in my mind, for having tried, like, is that's shifting for like a lot for 60k, like a day after day. That is significant. Like someone can go out and do 110k in an hour, and you're like, oh, that's okay. But you go, well, try doing that maybe 6 times a day for 80 days, and tell me that that's not absolutely shifting. Um, Good on you. Good on you. There's but I think um what's the history of this run? Has anyone done this exact run before? I believe I've listened to a podcast where there's someone else just as crazy as you that ran from coast to coast in Australia. Is that right? Or is there anyone? Is it? Am I right in that? Or are you the only one, or is there a whole group of crazy people like you? Like where does this stand in sort of just context of other crazy people?
Yeah, so no one's done this direct route that I had done. The only furthest distance across Australia would have been the most western coast, which I didn't even know about this western point until about a month out. And a good friend of mine, he was starting a month after I started, doing the same thing but going from the western, which would have added 500 more Ks. And that would have made it 5,000. He was doing 100
Right.
Ks a day. But he got injured, very injured on the fourth day. But no one's done the route that I've done,
Right.
especially not in that time. And then at the same time, there was a young gentleman from Sydney who did Perth to Sydney, and I think it was like 4,500 kilometers or something,
Yeah.
4,380 kilometers, I think it was. So at the same time, there was us three gentlemen that were taking it on. There was a woman from Melbourne who was doing top to toe, so the most northern
Right.
tip of Australia to the most southern tip. So she was doing a marathon a day. Um, and then at the same time, when, in my transit across the country, there was like 2 to 3 walkers who just decided that one day they wanted to make something of their life, and they just bought this unique pram and packed all of their life into the pram, and they were walking from coast to coast. So there's
Nice.
yeah, it must have been something in the air at the time. So
Wild.
there's a few people doing it, that's for sure. Yeah.
Wow. Um, when when you take on something like that, you described like the reason, the background before, and I said like there's if you're going to do something like that, even just to want to do something like that, there's got to be a really strong why, and then to actually achieve it and be able to do it, the why had to be there, like, and that was something much bigger than you. What were like my experience from a much smaller situation was that it ended up being nothing about what I thought it was going to be about at the beginning. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what and you had 81 days over 2.5 months, 3 months. It's a long period of time. The cycle of emotions as well as what was important to you at the time, like perspective on life and things like how how much did your how much did things change, or maybe they didn't change because you was already in that zen place. I don't know. And what's like your biggest learning point from it that you want to share with people, that's not to do with, I think, like me, it's like you don't have a if someone reaches out and says, oh, what's your running program for doing like an ultra, I'm like, there isn't one. I ain't got one. I'm not trying to get anyone else to be good at ultra running. I'm not even a blooming ultra runner. Like, what's your big, well, how did things change? Things must have changed across 80 days in your head or whatever. And what's the big What's the take-home message for people?
Yeah, it's a great question, man. Because this was at the forefront of my mind, running every day. It is by far the deepest spiritual work that I've ever done. It has been the deepest self-development work that I have ever done. Merely because, you're out there, you're confronted by the environments, the climate, the traffic, animals, like you're confronted by all of these things that for the most part, would trigger your biology or signal your biology to take up a more sympathetic tone. And you get used to that, as with all things that you start to condition yourself to. You get used to things and you find ways of coping and you find new mechanisms of being able to regulate yourself. But there's one thing that I could not escape, and that was, no matter how distracted I was, no matter how in tune with my body I was, I could never, ever get away from my thoughts or out of my head. And what I mean by getting out of my head was not being like analytical and trying to process things or anything like that, but being present, like being so present inside of myself and knowing that I am ultimately responsible for absolutely every single outcome and thing in my life.
Yeah.
Um, I worked with, I know you're Logan, from over at Deuce, right? So
Yeah.
I worked with Logan for over 12 months, and we become quite close. I reached out to him, said I'd like for you to coach me, and in that time he had many one-liners that I've written down and committed to memory, and I'll never forget. But he has a way with words and bringing context to a sentence. But he said this one thing that stayed with me, and it was so relevant for the run. It was like, your greatest responsibility in this life is that you're responsible for yourself. And that never left me. Like it stayed with me for so long. And when I was running and I was so intrinsically motivated, I was so aware that every single thing that I was doing, including the way that I react and respond and reflex to things, I was ultimately responsible for. And I could never get away from that. And so in an effort to not want to get away from those things, I discovered that it wasn't just in those moments of adversity or challenge or obstacle. It wasn't just in those moments. It was in every single moment of every single minute of every day.
Yeah.
And, I was blessed to be able to get up. I've healed my body. I don't have any of those medical conditions anymore. And so I was blessed to be able to get up, even though I was in pain, put my shoes on, be ready to go for a run, do the ultra, come back to camp, be a father to my two children who were both under 4, and then be a husband, and then take care of myself whilst asking for others to take care of me. Like I was so blessed to be able to do things, but in every single moment, I was so grateful because there's so much power in knowing you're responsible for everything.
Yeah.
And I believe that it's so neglected in today's society because we're always externally motivated by things or trying to distract ourselves with all of the shiny stuff, where really, if you sit in it, and this is why I'm so motivated by this type of work, is in healing, specifically using, breath work and other sorts of tools, is when you sit in it, whether it's uncomfortable or comfortable is irrelevant. When you sit in it, you become this advanced student in your own classroom with your own education. And by the time you finish sitting in it, you become an advanced student. You become this human being that just is just leveled up and leveled up. And you're not comparing yourself against anything except who you were a minute ago or a day ago or a month ago. That's the only person you can compare yourself against. And the only person you should be chasing is you from 5 years from now, and ultimately identifying what path it is that you want to take forward, what that person looks like in 5 years, and how you can re-engineer whatever that is to create actionable tasks towards goals and dreams, and then take purpose in your life. But it starts with knowing we are responsible for ourselves and knowing that we have the power to heal ourselves, whether it is emotional,
Yeah.
physically, spiritually, whatever it is, we have that power, you know.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest takeaway for me. And ever since then, I've been trying to write a chapter a day for my book, but it's other things come and
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
that
For
time, and
sure.
I'm not as disciplined, but I can't get away from this feeling or this notion of exactly that. And the more and more I break it down, like I'll write a chapter or parts of a chapter, and I'll stumble across some sort of theory, and then I'll spend a week breaking that theory down and looking deeper into it. And it just so happens at that exact moment, I have the honor of being able to work with people outside who are presenting with those exact stories. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's just this beautiful
Yeah.
universe
Yeah.
we live in with opportunity.
Yeah. I think there's the bit that resonates most with me, and I think that that's the um, such a huge gift we can try and help people engage in, is that like total immersion in the moment, as you were saying, like the when you take on a run or something like that, everything's stripped away, and it is literally
Mm.
like, right, am I going to put my shoes on today? Am I going to take the next step? And like I had it for 3 days, you had it for nearly 3 months, where literally nothing else matters other than trying to get from A to B when you're doing that that thing. And so um I remember feeling like, wow, I didn't look at a single email. I didn't look at any social media. I didn't do anything other than try and get from A to B, which was running around this island in Wales for 3 days. And it was horrendous. It's like the worst thing I've ever done in terms of like physically and mentally, no doubt, absolutely no doubt. But it's the best thing I've ever done. This, and it's that paradox. But I think that the reason it's the best thing I ever did, because uh, it just forced me to do nothing else apart from be completely present for 3 whole days. And the challenge I have for myself, and the invitation I think for everyone else, is like, where do we um, where do we find those opportunities? Because they're always there, as you said, it's there in every moment of every single. As someone's listening to this now, that is one of those moments. But are you listening to this and being present and immersed in it, or are you being distracted because you're doing something else at the same time? And you know, I just had it then, as you'd said something earlier, and it triggered a thought for me, and I wanted to ask you a question. And then I'm thinking about what I'm going to ask you whilst you're finishing the rest of your own last section, and I'm not fully
Mm.
immersed in that because I'm thinking about what I want to ask. And it's not through only because I want to ask you a good question. There's nothing bad in that, but it's just so easy not to be in that
Mm-hmm.
moment. And then the other thing for me was that you will have experienced as well with your small team, is having that team around you where you're just so broken that you rely on other people. And when I was the same as you, like having your wife there, it's just like it's such a special thing to be. And I guess it's probably slightly you were talked right at the beginning about the masculinity and getting and that archetype and helping men with that. um but at the same side, at the same time, the flip side of that was I was like, I need my wife more than ever. Like she literally ran she ran over half of it, bleeding with me, um, and
Mm-hmm.
that was just a beautiful experience from those two things. So, yeah, I've been inspired by people like you to take on my own um, journey. I don't want necessarily people to be like, oh, right. Um, so what run do I have to go and do? It's like the run was the
Right.
vehicle that forced us to be present. Um, for me, when I signed up to mine, um, I think my father had been diagnosed with cancer, and that's where he's from, that place in Wales. But he wasn't. There wasn't any indication. It was like, oh no, it's bad. It's I'm gonna forget now. It's well, I can't remember. But the type of cancer it was like, oh no, like you'll just live with it. You won't. The treatment's fine. Like you're not going to die all of a sudden. And he lasted like less than a
Mhm.
year from that point. And I had 3 days of like opportunity to actually process that. He passed away in the April and the run was in the September, and like I'm grateful for that time. Like you say, you're there on the road running, or you're there running, and there's you, and there's your steps, and there's your thoughts, and that's it. Um, and my encouragement for myself and for other people is like a physical challenge can be a great doorway to get into those spaces, but also where can we do that without physically ruining, like you described a lot of injuries that you picked up, like how where can we, and this probably leads us nicely into those questions, or that question, I'm going to ask, lead you into like the work you do now for helping people regulate nervous system, trauma release and everything. I just wanted to ask you one specific question about dietary stuff. Like you mentioned salts. You recommended to me, you were like, mate, the LMNT salts are like incredible. It's like the thing you need to take. I was like, and they were very kind. They sent me a number of boxes of this stuff that yeah, never ever had an inkling of cramp for the whole 3 days.
Yeah.
Whereas anytime I'd done a marathon distance before, I'd always get cramp. So that
Yeah.
was massive. For such long, ketogenic diet, getting into ketosis, was that ever a part of your training or fueling strategies? Like it can be quite big within the super ultra endurance world, which I think 4,500 kilometers fits into the super duper. Yeah, was there any aspect of that for you in sort of like training in the build up, or are you down with that type of diet or not? Where does it sit for you?
Yeah, it was predominantly my diet in preparation. When I spent 3 years training for this project, and majority of that I spent either in a keto diet or framework and or in ketosis, and that was present prior to training because I enjoyed that way of eating. My body
Mm.
responded really well. My ancestry is from the UK
Right.
and Scotland, and so when I dove back into my primal blueprint, identifying where my bloodline came from, what types of foods were available in all generations, in terms of
Right. Wow.
my heritage and how financially stable my heritage were, and then financial stability in those generations was completely, their nutrition was completely dependent upon their financial stability. And so I
Right. Yeah.
mapped that back so that I could get a good understanding of what my genetic bloodline looked like, and I could identify what types of foods I was going to respond well to and what not so well to. I tried carnivore for a little bit, and I absolutely loved it. And then you get to a point where you just, I don't know if this is a real statement or not, but where you get sick of eating meat. And it wasn't just about eating the meat. It was obviously animal products and those types of things, but I enjoy consuming nutrients. I
Yeah.
enjoy eating fruit, and I enjoy having honey and peanut butter and all of these things, and olives and avocados, and then pickled stuff. Like I'm a sucker for sauerkraut and pickles. And
Well, when you said Scottish,
so
I was thinking
I,
meats and tatties and battered Mars bars. I was thinking that's not. Maybe that's new.
nah.
That's more new school Scottish. Yeah.
But I transitioned across to keto, where I was able to have those types of foods be present in my diet, still feel completely satiated and not having to eat as regularly. When I'm not doing endurance projects, I can put on bulk quite easily, which in turn makes me hungry all the time.
I was gonna
And
say I've
so
seen people watching on
ketosis.
people watching the video, if you look at Will's Instagram, we'll put a link in the show notes. If you look at Will's Instagram from when he was running, it's like fair to say you became very slight. Yeah. I'm looking at it, I'm like going, how'd you get so jacked straight away after? I mean, it's probably been a lot longer than I think, but like you're jacked. You don't, yeah. And like, how much, what do you weigh now? What did you weigh at the start? And how much weight did you lose?
I was 83 kilos when I started the run, and that
Yeah.
was like a consistent. I was still doing 200 plus kilometers a week in training, and I was still
Wow.
83 kilos, which was good, and that was in ketosis as well.
Yeah.
And then by the time I finished the run, I was 69 kilos, and
Oh.
then I weigh
That's how
I
much
weigh
I weighed when I was
85 kilos now.
17. You weigh 85 now. Nice. Have you ever used
85 now.
there's some stuff around like brain health as well, but like ketones for like supplementary ketones. So you don't actually have to need to be in ketosis. It's like just they are you're just actually you are taking the ketones. There's a ketone IQ from HMVM, American company. If you come across them or use them, there's some really nice research on like from brain health and brain injury rehabilitation, stuff like that. So where I got introduced to it from, but also from being able to help with that fuel supply, particularly when you don't want to eat anything. Is that something? Did you explore that at all? Is that something you've seen or?
Yeah, so right before I started running, we lived in America for 4 months. Well, because we were still nomadic, we lived on the road in our caravan for 2 years, and we spent time
Cool.
here, time abroad, and whilst I was in America, I was still working over there. I was running workshops and doing different types of speaking events and hosting breathwork seminars, and I got into contact with someone who was directly involved with the HVMN project,
Oh, cool.
and they put me into contact with them, with the CEO directly. Chatted with him. He just happens to be an ultra runner as well, an
Yeah.
avid runner, and so he was so inspired by it. He said, I'm going to hook you up and send you through to the team. And I ended up working with this gentleman named Michael, and they
Yeah.
sent me, I've still got some, like they sent me cartons at the start of the run, and I've still got shots and or bottles in the
Yeah.
fridge, So
Yeah.
I was taking shots of that a day, and I still continue to. Some mornings I neglect them because I have a bulletproof. I
Yeah.
like a bulletproof instead of just a plain coffee.
Yeah.
Mid morning I'll have a bulletproof coffee. But if I'm having crashes, mind you, I don't crash often because I'm aware of where I'm at, how my body's
Yeah.
operating, and usually I can pinpoint what exactly is wrong. But if I'm having spontaneous crashes and it's not an ideal time to have a crash, I will take a shot during the day of
Yeah.
the ketones IQ, which just gives me that little bit more
Yeah.
focus and removal of brain fog, because I can deal with the lethargy, but can't deal with the brain fog. I get
Yeah.
frustrated with
Yeah.
having brain fog,
Yeah.
and
No, I've seen
when I'm
that.
writing a lot, it just
Yeah.
yeah.
It's about, yeah, super helpful for that. Like I've seen big improvements in my sleep as well. And then say there's the brain injury side of it, like during the acute phase when the brain's being restricted from blood flow. But that's a separate thing. Oh, cool. Yeah. No, that's
Yeah.
interesting to know. Yeah. I'm starting to utilize it now. I've got a small 2-day ultra coming up. The first thing I've done in terms of a decent event in
Mhm.
at the beginning of April, and it'll be the first time I'll have done an event as fueled on as having the ketones as part of actually my fueling strategy. So I'm interested to see. I've been using it in training. I'm interested to see how that goes on. So just finish off that like then by moving into what you then do now in terms of the the run was a vehicle, was a an experiment, was like proving something to people to open opportunities, I guess, and give you a space to connect with people on a totally different level where you're breaking misconceptions about what's possible in terms of healing, in terms of trauma, in terms of nervous system regulation. What does there's some big words in there, and people may have come across those words, but I always think a lot of the time it can be a bit, it can mean different things to different people depending on what their experience has been like. Um, what
Mm.
does the work that you do in that area, what does it look like? What does it entail? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point, man. Like, I'm a facilitator or teacher, so we hold a 12-month container slash mentorship where we work with men from all over the globe in a very intimate setting. It's become a brotherhood where they're connecting in and around what we're learning together, but also external from that. We host weekly virtual meetings, monthly gatherings in and around the campfire. And there's quite some potent medicine around the campfire being what it is, because when you sit around the campfire together, especially with a bunch of men, and someone breaks the floodgates and
I
lets it
love a
go, and then
fire.
all of a sudden
Yeah.
it's just like all around. And so that's just such a beautiful medicine in itself. And then we have two big retreats a year where we go to this specific location here in New South Wales, and we dive deep together. Everything from breath work to cold plunge to music to warrior initiations and ceremonial practices. But the main point to dive into here is exactly what you said. It can mean so many different things to so many different people. And for each man that has stepped into this brotherhood, they're not necessarily reaching out saying, hey, I've got some trauma and I want to heal that. Like, that's not what's happening. They've got all these other things that are occurring in their lifestyle that is impacting them, whether it be physically, emotionally, or financially, or spiritually. These other things are impacting them. It could be broken relationships, or going through a separation or divorce, or living away from their children, being in a job they don't like, being financially, their financial hygiene's, unhealthy, or spiritual hygiene's unhealthy, physical, like there's so many different things. And so, stepping into this container, they're not just learning, one thing to fix that one problem. They're becoming part of a community that is connecting from the heart, and in a space of love and compassion and non-judgment and acceptance and all of these things. And more often than
Yeah.
not, that's enough.
Yeah.
That's enough. But to take it deeper, because we want all men and all people to prosper in life and be filled with abundance. That's a dream of ours, but what we want these men to walk away with is a toolbox where in any one moment, if their environment is signaling them to, have these reflexive behaviors that aren't beneficial to them,
Mm.
then they know that they can pull on this tool and know exactly what's going on, how to apply it, how to mitigate the risk of it getting worse or prolonged, and then be able to move through it eloquently. We
Yeah.
my good friend Caspar, he talks about input versus output, and the circles of optimization. And as human beings, we're just these information gathering machines. We're taking in information even when we don't know that we are.
More in a
And
lifetime,
all those,
about more, we're taking more information in one day or 1 hour or something than we used to in a lifetime, because of the internet, apparently. Like, yeah. Sorry.
exactly right. And our surroundings are changing. Like, evolution in its essence is I wouldn't necessarily say upgrading, but it is moving forward at a rapid rate. And
Yeah.
so even to sit here in my living room, my body is taking in information of the state of different rooms, the energy that was maybe here present, the plants that are around, the stuff that's here in front of me, hearing your voice, hearing my voice. Like, information is consistent, and that's
Mm.
input. Now, output, what goes into us, right? And that's our circles of optimization, where we identify how the information comes in, how we process it, the story we give it, the narrative we give it,
Mm.
and then what is our output or our behavior or reaction to that information coming in.
Yeah.
And so for these men, it's giving them the tools to navigate that, learn about the stresses in their lives, which ones are healthy, which ones are not, learn how to manage and regulate anxiety or stress when it's present, learn how to communicate effectively and non-violently, learn how to look after your body through gentle movement practices, yin and yang movement practices, learn how
Yeah.
to, nourish your body by working in harmony with the earth, right? Like using regenerative soils in farming, or shopping local at farmers that do that, and having produce that is clean of all the crap that they spray all over it. Like all of these things are vital to both the evolution of us and the success that we have in our individual lives. And so when you fix one, it becomes easier to fix the next. And then when you find yourself flowing in the motion of these things just operating in harmony, all the other crap that goes on in our life seems to fall back into place. Like, why was I so worried about that before? I don't even care about that anymore because I'm back in balance. My energy levels are back. My sleep's at 8 hours plus. I'm breathing better. My breathing mechanics are better. My nervous system is parasympathetic much rather than being in that state of survival 24/7, So yeah, for the men that are here with us, they're getting so much more than they expected, but at the same time, that is snowballing into their lives and affecting more people again. And so
the ripple effect.
it's beautiful work to be a part of, and I feel very honored and blessed that the trust that they give us.
Yeah, well, to sound very Australian, good on you, mate. But there's just, I want to like emphasize one bit that really resonated with me, for you to say within all that, partly because it also might be a misconception around the getting back to masculinity, whereas, which you said at the start, and then one of the things you said is like doing this through love and showing love and people feeling loved and cared for within this brotherhood, as you put it, which someone, when they may hear the term masculinity, they might think that they might not necessarily think of that side of it. And in terms of healing, there's a Dr. Sally Bell, that we do some, she's part of the Rooted Life team. We do some work together, where she said, with all of the patients that she's ever seen, those that get better and those that don't get better, the one thing that she has seen that's a common denominator is whether that person feels loved or not. So if they feel loved, they can get better. If they don't know that they're loved, it's very difficult for them to get better, which I think is, yeah, you highlight there, and you're doing some beautiful stuff there. So keep it up. I think that the most important thing for the end of the podcast is for people to, this type of work that you're doing, it's people need to come and see you, or be able to contact you, be able to find out, it's talking about it is fine, but where can people actually plug in, and how can they find out more about what you're doing and actually get to work with you, or gain some access to the tools that you're delivering?
Yeah, they can. Instagram right now is my only hub, where to extrapolate that, we're building some other ecosystems in and around that as we transition from a different side of tech. But Instagram, I'm there and accessible. I have some links in there that people can access. And then, I get back to all my messages. I have messages during the day that they pile up, and I might not get back that day, but I personally get back to all my messages, and where I can support, I always will. There's maybe 3 to 4 times a week that I just have random phone calls because somebody dropped a comment on a post, and I felt that their energy may have been a bit low, and I reached out and I say, hey, do you want to have a chat? And they're like, yep. And I book a call, we have a chat, and we go about our ways. And that's where the work is, right? So yeah, most people can find me there on Instagram, and I imagine you'll put my link in the show notes, but it's at themind.mechanic. So
at themind.mechanic, check out on Instagram, and then you can find all of the links to how you can connect. So highly recommend people go and follow Will and the work that he's doing. And if you, clearly he's a man of great love and integrity, and if you want to reach out, just encourage you to do that. And as he says, he'll get back to you. So Will, mate, well, I don't know, like, thank you. but also like, wow, what you've done. There's I need to talk to you separately, probably off air, because there's the coastal path around the whole of the United Kingdom is 8,500 kilometers. So it would be, close to twice what you did. That's something that I've gone like, it's too big a jump to do, but that's something that's on that I'm like, that would allow me to the little island that I live on in this amazing world would be allow us to go and see the whole entire place, and it wouldn't be a race to try and do it. Someone's done it, I think, in like 100 odd days or something.
Mm.
It wouldn't be about that; it'd be about the experience. But you may well say to me, Jacko, that's not for you. I don't know,
Oof.
but we can talk off air maybe. But I'm just putting it out there.
Don't dangle that carrot. I'll chew
But
it.
you trained for 3 years to do yours, so
Say
yeah.
again, sorry.
You trained for 3 years to do yours. I need to put a bit more work in.
I did.
I
Yeah.
need to do the work, mate. Well, I'll ask you about that off air, but I've just thrown it out there into the world, and people can badger me. The listeners can listeners can make a vote. Maybe we could have a vote. I think I can do a poll on Spotify actually if you're listening on Spotify. Right, but well, thank you so much for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure, and yeah, we'll stay connected, and I look forward to seeing more of what you're doing, and staying connected ourselves as well.
Appreciate you, brother. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you again, man.
Take care.
Sending you lots of love. And
And you.
yeah, let's connect soon.
Wow. There we have it then. Will Burnett is ran across the whole of Australia. Wow. I can't put into words. It was great. I actually had the chance to connect with him before he did that run and before I did the Ring of Fire. And those that have seen the Between Breaths film will know that, okay, I did 3 days, which is nothing compared to what he did, but I did experience a bit of trauma and challenge. I can't put into words what on earth must have been going through that guy's mind and body. Yeah, special individual. And as you heard there at the end, yes, I have something in my. I've said it out loud when we did to the people that came to the private screening of the Between Breaths film in the cinema screening in Nottingham, and yeah, that notion of running around the UK, it wouldn't be a race. Remember, it's not a race. It wouldn't even be an event. It'd be an experience. Um, that's 8,500 kilometers or something like that. Would be the opportunity to see the whole of this little island that we live on called the United Kingdom, or that I live on called the United Kingdom. Interested in feedback. Is that just dumb? Is that just like you're just being stupid? Um, is that something you're like, oh, I'd come and run a bit of it with you? Mrs. Jacko is keen, so long as it's not a race, and we take our time and we have a nice time, and we see the places rather than just having a horrendous race for a checkpoint. Obviously, there's some significant logistical hurdles to get over to make that happen, but yeah, is it just stupid, and is it just ego? So give us some feedback, or is it like, yeah, that sounds as an experience, that sounds cool, and yeah, I'd come and run a bit of the path with you on a couple of days or whatever. Like, I'll come and run 5K with you, or 10K, or maybe you come for a week. It would probably take us 6 months or something. 5 or 6 months is realistic, if not longer. So there'd be plenty of time to come if you are based in the UK. Yeah, I'm putting it out there, and I just love to. It's not going to be anytime soon. He did 3 years of training to do half of that, so we need to put some work in. So we've got plenty of time to plan it. But yeah, no, I'd love to hear. Feedback on what people think. So yeah, thanks forever for listening. I believe on Spotify you can do a poll. So if you don't listen to the podcast on Spotify, if you head over to Spotify, you can actually answer this question in a poll format. If you're watching it on YouTube, you can just make a comment in the comments, or if you want to connect a little bit more on Instagram, jacko.david.jackson on Instagram, or you can email me info@probreathwork.com. So yeah, look forward to I look forward to hearing from you, and maybe running with you around the UK for a bit of it in a few years' time. Maybe, who knows? We'll see. Um, but yeah, thanks for listening. You've been breathing. I've been Jacko. That was Will. Until next time, keep it nasal.